The history of how Vietnamese refugees get to America starts at the end of the Vietnam War. The South Vietnamese capital, Saigon, was captured by the North Vietnamese on April 29, 1775. At this point, American troops had already been backing out of Vietnam, otherwise known as Vietnamization. Government officials and military leaders had been fleeing through any means possible, such as airplanes and helicopters. Dwindling support from American troops had solidified the end of the Southern Vietnamese, and the official end of the Vietnam War was on April 30th, 1975. Afterwards, over 3 million Southern Vietnamese fled Vietnam, leaving through makeshift boats and some unfortunately becoming victims to pirates. Even worse, those that were left behind were subjected to torture or re-education. Although aiding the refugees was very apparent, many of the nations in Southeast Asia were yet to become a part of the United Nations, so the rapid amount of refugees coming into neighboring countries led to their entry being refused and kicked back into the ocean. Around 2.5 million Vietnamese people were able to make it to refugee camps opened up after the end of the war. Refugee camps were in places such as Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and the Philippines. In 1979, the UN had devised the plan to permanently resettle the Vietnamese in refugee camps in countries such as the US, Australia, France, and Canada. 620,000 refugees were resettled in over 20 countries in the span of 3 years. But with such a large amount of people in such a short amount of time, the resettlement process could have taken months for some and years for others. In 2005, the last of the documented Vietnamese refugees were taken in at Malaysia. In the months to follow the initial diaspora of Vietnamese, President Gerald Ford and Congress allowed for the help of Vietnamese refugees to evacuate and resettle within the U.S., providing aid to over 140,000 people. Because of the UN's orderly departure program, an additional 500,000 Vietnamese refugees were able to immigrate to the U.S. straight from Vietnam from 1979 to 1999. Refugees coming into America had come through waves. The first wave in 1975 had been taken in with open arms, as they were well educated and had been able to speak English. The second wave, however, had arrived in 1979, but due to generally being poorer and less educated than the first wave, received the cold shoulder from the American public and had a harder time adjusting to American living. The refugees arriving in the second wave were the ones deemed as boat people. Out of all the countries, the US had taken in the largest amount of Vietnamese refugees, having a total of about 988,000 in the early 2000s. The most popular destinations for these immigrants consisted of Texas and California, with one of the most populated camps being located in Westminster, Orange County, now housing Little Saigon, or otherwise known as Vietnam Town. After interviewing both of my parents, asking them how they each got to America, it was interesting seeing how similar, yet different their experiences were. She had spent 3 days and 4 nights on the ocean, and spent about a year and a half at the Malaysian refugee camp until they were qualified by the US Embassy to immigrate to America in 1983. My dad, on the other hand, had escaped in the December of 1793 with his 6 brothers and sister, with a non-makeshift boat. It had taken him 3 nights and 2 days to reach Thailand, which he spent 7 months at before relocating to the Philippines for 3 months. It was only until then that my dad could immigrate to the US in 1980. My mom and dad had both spent different amounts of time in refugee camps and fled from Vietnam in different years, but they were still able to arrive at the same camp located in Westminster, Orange County.